It's Thursday. That means it is time for a little Wager Talk, brought to you by WagerTalk.com. We bring in the legend, the man, the myth. He is here. It is Ralph Michaels. He joins us via the Miami Acura hotline. And Ralph, thanks for stopping by on this Thursday, my friend.
Always a pleasure. You know, doing your show is always a highlight of my week. I thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, that's what my ex-wife said for a long, long time until she left me. Appreciate that, though, Ralph. Honestly, I really do, man. Love the smoke you're blowing my way. Let's talk some exciting football, certainly here in South Florida this weekend. We've got the old rivalry back in center stage. Miami taking on Florida State. Florida State just not very good this year. Miami is hoping to kind of start their own streak. They won last year. They're hoping maybe to rattle off a few more wins moving forward. What do you think about this game? We're looking almost 2 touchdowns now, Ralph.
You know what? You need motivation to cover this kind of game. Obviously, it's a rivalry, so any extra motivation is great. And I think Miami, from what I'm reading, is really circle the wagons, beating North Carolina like they did and dropping in the polls. They have to make a statement. The thing I like about this Miami team is 60 TFLs. Put it in perspective, last year the leader in college football was Ohio State. They had 113 TFLs on the year. Miami already with 60. We've seen Florida State allow 4 sacks to Syracuse, 5 sacks to Virginia Tech, and they really struggled in those games when getting pressure. I think Miami gets that pressure, and in fact, I have Miami winning and covering this week.
Wow, there you go. Miami fans are going to love to hear that. Ralph Michaels joining us, WagerTalk.com, at Cal Sports LV. And, you know, Ralph, before we go any further, you got some very interesting free information at WagerTalk.com that anybody who's even thinking about betting on some of the games this weekend should probably go and download. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, if you go to the WagerTalk.com website and you go to the handicappers on the top toolbar, just go to the Cal Sports download, and every day you get my free downloads. You have to register once, but there's no credit card needed. Once you register, you can download these free every day and every week. The Gridiron Guide is the first. That's a full page on every game. It gives you the yardage, the lines, it gives you the log, it gives you quarter-by-quarter scoring for those that can play the first quarter or first half bets. And then it gives you 20 ATS and over-under categories, how teams do as home favorites, home dogs, off a loss, off a win. So that's a great tool each week. And then the second, and I'm really proud of this, is a stat comparison sheet, which just started this week. And you can look at every game, and it has my offense, defense, and special teams ratings. We know that just because you lead the NCAA in offense doesn't mean you're the best offense in football. It's relative to the strength of schedule you played. So those are unique. You have the strength of schedule. And, you know, this game we just finished talking about, Miami and Florida State. Florida State's offense, based on the schedule they've played, is number 117 out of 130 FBS teams. That shows how bad they've been.
Yeah, it has not been good, and FSU fans, they're just hoping if they can beat Miami, then they don't care if they lose every other game throughout the year. They've kind of already come to that realization right now. Ralph Michaels joining us. So get to WagerTalk.com. Some very valuable information that you can get there for free. All right, we'll keep it in South Florida. A lot of people in the Boca Raton area loving the FAU Owls, taking on those pesky Old Dominion Monarchs who took down Virginia Tech just a couple of weeks ago. I know we talked about this team last week. You were very weary about them. You know, the public tends to jump all over somebody that they just saw beat a team like Virginia Tech, and they're taking on FAU, who is really the only team this year that has taken UCF as really exchanged blows with UCF from an offensive standpoint here. What do you like with the FAU Owls versus the Old Dominion? I don't happen to think this is going to be a game. I think Florida Atlantic is going to run it up on them, but what do you see?
Well, you know, Old Dominion went to a quarterback change, and we talked about it last week, and they impressed me going to East Carolina, at least on the scoreboard. At first I thought I was impressed because they only lost 37-35. But if you look at the yardage, Old Dominion actually got outgained by 221 yards. So there's some value playing against Old Dominion. While most look at them and say, well, they covered against East Carolina, In fact, they shouldn't have covered. They were very fortunate with some defensive and special teams big plays. Now, FIU, I think the offense is still not where it was last year. Yes, they hung tough with UCF, and they only got outgained by 98 yards on the road, and they were minus 3 turnovers. Going to Middle Tennessee, they had the yardage edge last week, but lost. You know, I think Bryles moving to Houston as the OC and Charlie Weiss Jr. moving in, the offense is not quite what it is to the level it is. But I also think that FAU's offense is good enough against this Old Dominion defense that's allowing 509 yards per game to score a lot. And I think Old Dominion against this FAU offense, remember I said last week, East Carolina was one of the most improved defenses. Florida Atlantic is not one of those best defenses. I look for a very high-scoring game.
Yes, well, I do too, and it's just one-dimensional with the Monarchs. They're averaging just 3.1 yards per carry this season. That's not going to get it done, especially when you go up against an offense like that at FAU. And then the other Florida team we got, Ralph, is LSU. Taking on Florida. That's right, and it's going to be Gainesville, the Swamp. It's going to be an awful lot of fun. But Florida not used to being an underdog in their own building. What do you think? LSU minus 2.5 right now.
You know, full disclosure, I was wrong about LSU going to Auburn. I liked the Tigers. I was wrong about LSU last week against Mississippi. They laid it on with 573 yards. But now they're going on the road, and the difference in this game to me is Dan Mullen. I loved what he did at Mississippi State. Look at the drop-off at Mississippi State this year with him being gone. I think he's the difference maker in Florida. Both of these defenses rank in my top 12. I think it's a low-scoring game, and although Joey Burrow had some success last week, the LSU quarterback, he's still only completing 53% of his passes, and LSU as a team is only averaging 4.4 yards per carry. You look at the Florida side, on offense, they're averaging 5.3 yards per carry, with Dameon Pierce averaging 10.6 yards per carry, and Felipe Franks is the real deal with a 12-3 ratio.
Ralph Michaels joining us, wagertalk.com. Make sure you head over to wagertalk.com. Some great, valuable, free information there if you're planning on diving in and taking any action this weekend. I happen to agree with you. I think Florida's I like Florida's chances in this game at home in the Swamp. That place is going to be crazy. And one of the other games that we're hearing a lot about, and this is another one of those public perception recency bias, the public is buying Notre Dame, man. They are believing big in Notre Dame, but they've got a pretty tough matchup in the ACC. Virginia Tech this weekend there. What do you like this? Virginia Tech getting 6.5 and 7 in some lines.
Now, unlike LSU, I've had a great feel for Notre Dame, and you know I thought Ian Book did what he did against Wake Forest, and look what they did against Stanford, putting up 550 yards. Not only is Ian Book making his third start now, you also got back Dexter Williams last week. Dexter Williams, a running back who last year averaged 9.2 yards per carry. He was suspended the first 4 games. His first game back against Stanford, 161 yards, 7.7 yards per carry. Now, the problem I have is this. The Irish already are talking about, we're going to be favored in this game. We're going to be favored in this game. We're going to be favored in this game. We run the table. We have to get to the championship. Those players are thinking that exact same scenario. I think this is the trap game of the week. You have a Bud Foster defense that's playing well in lieu of one game. They had one bad game against Old Dominion, and Old Dominion had gone to a quarterback they didn't prep for, so they weren't quite ready. But you look at Virginia Tech as a home dog. In their last 51 non-conference games, Virginia Tech is 48-3 straight up. Only one loss in 51 non-conference games was by over a touchdown, and that one loss was to the number 1 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, who had revenge for losing as a double-digit favorite at home the year before. I think Bud Foster slows it down. I think Virginia Tech's a very live home dog and a good chance to pull the upset.
Love that. And I got to mention this, too. I got to bring this up because I know we had talked about this game last week. California had the late game against Oregon, and then they turned the ball over 5 times, and then that was the end of that. I actually do like California. They are heading over to one of the most disappointing teams in the Pac-12. Kevin Sumlin, Arizona, watched that game, too, and was just completely disappointed in them and their performance last week, too. You've got California as a slight favorite in this game. Arizona at home. What do you like in here? What do you don't like about California and Arizona?
Well, I love the way Justin Wilcox has this team going. And remember, the Bears had 18 starters back this year. So you had a team that was decent last year, just missed bowl eligibility, and they've shown they're very capable of doing what they can do is win games. And Arizona, obviously there's an issue with Khalil Tate. We don't know what that is. Khalil Tate jumped on the scene last year, mid-year through the year, rushed for 1,400 yards and 9.2 yards per carry as their quarterback. 1,400 yards in 7 games last year. That's 200 yards a game. This year, he has 70 yards rushing in 5 games. So either Sumlin is a complete fool and doesn't want to run him, or obviously I think there's an injury where Tate can't run. Well, when you have Arizona and a very mediocre team and a quarterback who is supposed to be a dual-threat quarterback and can only complete 53% of his passes, he's not the guy you want back there in the situation. I favor California.
Yeah, I agree with you there 100%. Ralph Michaels joining us, wagertalk.com, at CalSportsLV. All right, let's transition. NFL game tonight, Thursday Night Football. Colts, Patriots. I'm not even sure we can call this a rivalry anymore, Ralph. I'm pretty sure it's not a rivalry. Means you have a chance of winning some of the games in the past, but I think we're going on a 7-0 streak now for the New England Patriots against this team. But with no T.Y. Hilton, no Marlon Mack, no Jack Doyle for the Colts, we do have a rejuvenated and what appears to be a very healthy Andrew Luck. And if you're going to lay 10 points, double digits in this game, be wary with a healthy Andrew Luck. How do you see it?
Agree with that thought. And, this is a game that I'm not playing for my customers. But if I had to pick a side, I would think I would lean with the Patriots. I think we see that last week they were a different offense. You have to remember that 2 weeks ago when they went to Detroit and lost that game on Sunday night or Monday night, whatever it was, they only had 3 wide receivers on the roster. I mean, they line up with 4 receivers sometimes and then need a backup. They only had 3 wide receivers. They now have a few people back and healthy. Andrew Luck is 0-5 against Bill Belichick. And an amazing stat I tweeted out earlier, Andrew Luck's career quarterback rating is 87.7. We know Belichick can come up with defenses that stymies rookies, but he's come up with defenses that have also stymied Andrew Luck in the past. Andrew Luck, 87.7 career rating, 65.1 QB rating when he's facing Belichick. So he's really struggled. One note I will say, though, Andrew Luck has been money off a loss. They are off that loss to Houston. It is tough playing overtime and traveling on a short week to Thursday, but Luck is 23-6 against the spread off a loss, including 8-0 straight up, 7-1 ATS his last 8 games.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty impressive. That's a pretty impressive number there. Ralph Michaels joining us. Ralph, one of these other games that I'm looking at on the board this weekend, and this line makes no sense to me, and I'm hoping you can shed some light. The Denver Broncos traveling to New York. I get the whole West Coast team coming to the East Coast, but why are the Jets a -1 favorite, even though they're at home here? I don't see it. What do you think about this? Is this one of those double take games here that we're looking at?
Well, I think people just feel Denver's in a letdown spot, having played Kansas City and losing in last minute to Mahomes like they did. But I agree with you. Although I actually give 2 or 3 points to the New York Jets because of the situation. Denver off an East Coast trip to Baltimore, coming back to face your division rivals on Monday night, and going back to the East Coast is very difficult. But now we have a defense that's that's playing very well. Be it they gave up 446 yards to Mahomes. They gave up 22 first downs, and they played well as a team. The New York Jets team, Sam Darnold, we thought was the second coming of Joe Namath. But, playing a rookie quarterback with a new offense the first week and they put up 48 Detroit, that's not that much of a surprise. Last 3 weeks, 12 points to Miami, 17 points at Cleveland, 12 points at Jacksonville, playing a physical Jacksonville team and now playing another physical Denver team. I think we're going to see Sam Darnold probably get sacked 4 or 5 times on the day, and I think he's really going to struggle.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very long day for the New York Jets and their fan base there. And you mentioned Jacksonville. The other game a lot of people excited about, of course, is the Kansas City Chiefs. We got the one of the top leading offense in the National Football League going up against one of the best defenses. Something has got to give. What do you think gives in that game?
Give me the Jaguars, give me the Jaguars, give me the Jaguars.
Yeah.
Jacksonville's allowing 259 yards per game. The best defense normally beats the best offense. KC's off that emotional Monday night comeback. Yes, Mahomes is playing great, but this is a whole level of defense that's different than they've had. Mahomes has only been sacked 5 times on the year, never more than twice per game. But the Jacksonville Jaguars can get after them. They have shutdown corners, which makes a difference. Mahomes won't have the time he had to pass the ball as he has in previous weeks. And I think this is going to end up being a pros versus Joe games where, the fans are in love with KC, and why wouldn't you be? But how about this for a stat? KC may be 4-0 and be the darlings of most people. They're still getting outgained by 55 yards per game. Jacksonville is outgaining their foes by 105 yards. Stat-wise, if you put Band-Aids over the names and just looked at the stats, Jacksonville would be a 5 or 6 point favorite based on those year-to-date stats. When you have the worst defense, I don't care who you're playing. When you're playing a defensive team, I'm gonna back the stop side.
Yeah, there is some truth to that. Ralph Michaels, WagerTalk.com. Before I let you go, Ralph, I've been looking at the latest odds to win the Super Bowl that have come out here in the futures. And I'm stuck. My eyes keep going. Plus 1,800 Baltimore Ravens, who I think defensively aren't getting enough credit for what's been going on there and how they've been able to adjust in second half of games, just shutting people down, which is a mark of a champion. And Flacco is still playing. It's a fun defense. It's a fun offense to watch. At plus 1,800, I'm looking at the Baltimore Ravens going, there's some value there.
I can't argue with that point. That wasn't in my mindset. I did play the Rams earlier in the year and had a great line on them. I also played Jared Goff to win the MVP, and, those are looking great. But, the thing I like about that is that you look at the competition. Since he's playing okay, but at the end of the year, they're not going to be there. We know Pittsburgh has their troubles. They're not going to be there. So you have a team that right now, with the Pittsburgh win at Pittsburgh, is going to control their division. Well, that gives you a horse in the race at the end of the year, no matter what happens. That, again, is a great thought process by you, Joe.
Yep, well, it's all about value, Ralph. If it's one thing WagerTalk.com and Ralph Michaels talks about, it's find a damn value, and there is some value in the Baltimore Ravens at plus 1,800. All right, you got to get to WagerTalk.com. You got to check out Ralph's page there at CalSportsLV. Some amazing information on his Twitter handle. Make sure you check him, follow him out. The stats, the trends, unbelievable. Ralph, thank you for taking a few minutes out, my friend, hanging out with us. Good luck this week. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Ralph Michaels, WagerTalk.com. All right, guys, so joining us here on this Friday is our good friend Russell Baxter, NFL Spin Zone, also ProFootballGuru.com. He was at the game last night in Foxborough. Wasn't much of a game the first half, but turned out to be a pretty entertaining game in the second half. Russell joins us via the Miami Acura hotline. And, Russell, thanks for taking a few minutes, my friend.
No problem at all. Yeah, it was interesting. It got away from the Colts in the first half, and all of a sudden, with about 12 minutes to go, it's a 7-point game. But New England made some plays, which they hadn't done really, kind of like the first 3 games. And it was a very odd game because you saw both Andrew Luck and Tom Brady throw 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. But I want to say 3 of the 4 interceptions by the 2 guys were off the hands of their teammates. The one that Luck threw in the first half, Patrick Chung, he had, I think, Adrian Claiborne in his face, and he probably shouldn't have thrown the ball. But he had a weird one in the fourth quarter where Pascal had the ball, and he kind of flipped it when he was trying to catch it. And Jonathan Jones picked that off. And, of course, the Hogan and Gronkowski had balls fall off their hands. So it was an entertaining game. If you won 62 points, which is almost becoming the norm this season in any contest. So
it is, and I think that's also the 8th or 9th time in a row that the over has happened in that series, in that particular game between those 2 teams. But Julian Edelman kind of made his presence felt pretty quickly in that game last night. Between him and Gordon, kind of add a whole different dimension to this team that we haven't seen thus far.
Yeah, it looked like it was going to be the Julian Edelman show. He caught 3 passes for 28 yards on the first series, and then didn't really do all that much. He had a punt return, but he didn't do all that much the rest of the game. And then it became the James White show for a while, who caught, I think, 8 or 9 passes in the first half, but only finished with 10 catches. So, slowly but surely you saw other people emerge for this team. But I know Bill Belichick can't be happy with a team that gave up 439 yards of total offense. The Colts self-destructed on a couple of occurrences, but defensively there's still a long way to go. If you're the New England Patriots, giving up those pass yards, the Colts were just able to chip away and hang around. And, it's kind of strange. It was kind of like the Texans game where they were up and Houston, made it respectable, but this was even more so. So, obviously too early to bury the Patriots at 1-2, but certainly I wouldn't say they're totally back yet. I think they're still trying to find, and that's understandable with the amount of people they lost this offseason and the amount of people they're trying to groom. Remember, the vast majority of all their draft choices are on injured reserve. Yeah,
and it's a shame, too, because fans, I know they're wondering, at least I was wondering watching that game last night, what would that have been if we had T.Y. Hilton and Mack in the offensive line? If Indianapolis had its weapons and was a little healthier, that might have been a different outcome. But what is your impression of Andrew Luck? Does he look 100% back? Does he look completely healthy to you?
Not completely, but the last 2 weeks he had zip on the ball last night, which means he had zip on the ball last week at Houston. And for him to have zip on the ball 4 days afterwards to me is a very encouraging sign. Now he'll get a little time to rest his arm. They play the Jets next at MetLife Stadium, but he'll have a week and a half off. Listen, you go back to the end of the Philadelphia game. They had to bring in Jacoby Brissett to throw a Hail Mary pass.
Exactly.
Last week he threw the Hail Mary pass. Not saying it was on a rope, but a Hail Mary doesn't come on a rope anyway. But he was able at least to get the ball downfield. He threw with a lot more authority, and I think you could sense it in the post game from him that he felt like he was getting better. He felt like he still had a long way to go. But I think he was at least throwing the ball like we're accustomed to seeing Andrew Luck throwing a football.
Yes, absolutely. Russell Baxter joining us, ProFootballGuru.com. Speaking of just also kind of strange here, what is going on with Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay and that offense and him calling out Mike McCarthy? It's it's always been a strange dynamic, Russell, but it seems to be getting weirder.
Well, I think this was less about calling out Mike McCarthy than other people do. I think he was just pointing out the shortcomings of the team's offense. And let's go back and look at something very closely, okay? Three second-half touchdowns when they beat the Bears, okay? Joe, they put 29 points on the board against the Minnesota Vikings. You know how many times their offense reached the end zone?
Yeah, how many?
Once,
yeah. Well, there you go.
Once. They got 5 field goals and a blocked punt for a touchdown. That's how they scored the 29 points. They got started late. They only scored 2 touchdowns against the Redskins. Okay, they scored 2 first-half touchdowns and missed an extra point. In the Buffalo game, they got nothing but field goals in the second half. So, I mean, 2, 4, 5 offensive touchdowns in their last 3 games.
Yep.
Okay, so I understand the concern by Aaron Rodgers. And, you know, I heard Aaron Rodgers speak yesterday. I didn't hear him throwing anybody under the bus. I heard him saying that he had to play better as well. But, you know, it's a team that doesn't have all its receivers healthy. I think they miss Jordy Nelson a lot. I think he's still kind of getting used to what Jimmy Graham can do and so on. And it's a team that has to be offensive dependent because listen, I know they pitched a shutout against Buffalo last week. Okay, but, you know, it's the second time in 4. Well, I mean, you want to talk about a team with offensive line problems.
Yeah.
The reason they were able to beat Minnesota is because the Vikings' offensive line actually was worse than Buffalo's offensive line that day. So I understand Rodgers. I've seen Aaron Rodgers throw 6 touchdown passes in 1 half. Okay? So they're not playing well offensively. So I certainly understand it. And, you know, Detroit's always been a team he's owned. He's won 13 of his 16 starts against them. I think he's thrown something like 34 touchdowns and 6 picks in 16 games against the Lions. But this is Matt Patricia's defense, so it's a little different. And he's got a bunch of banged-up wide receivers. So I think because of the way Aaron Rodgers carries himself sometimes, I think there's this immediate reaction that he's trying to throw Mike McCarthy under the bus. Well, you know, if you want to throw Mike McCarthy under the bus, you know, blame him and the organization for not getting a better defense for the last 8 or 9 years.
Amen to that. Russell Baxter, ProFootballGuru.com, joining us via the Miami Acura hotline. And Russell, sputtering offense is one thing, but we've got a defensive issue happening in Pittsburgh and Atlanta for 2 totally different reasons, and they get ready to do battle this weekend. And I hate to say kind of must-win game, but are we looking at a Mike Tomlin hot seat if they don't win this game?
Well, not necessarily, because unless Cincinnati or Baltimore pulls itself away. Now, the Steelers are 0-1-1 in the division. That's the kind of stuff I look at, okay? You know, if you're Minnesota, like, for instance, Minnesota, Philadelphia, some people would say the same thing, Joe. Minnesota hasn't won a game since week 1.
Yeah.
Okay? They've had to tie in 2 straight losses. Meanwhile, the Chicago Bears haven't lost a game since week 1, and they're off this week. So, you know, in the NFC East, it's all bunched up. In the NFC North, there's a little bit of separation. Not a great deal, but enough. So you're also playing a conference opponent. In the case of the Steelers and the Falcons, you know, it's an interconference game. It doesn't mean as much in the tiebreakers, but you brought up the Falcons. They've given up 80 points the last 2 weeks. Pittsburgh's been – I mean, and both at home, by the way, 43 and 37. So, you know, the Steelers offensively were awful in the second half against Baltimore. I mean, I know the Ravens' defense is good, but you hold the Steelers to 47 total yards and a half of football. I mean, that's more than just Baltimore's defense. So this is one of those games where a number of people picked either one of these teams or even both of these teams to be in the Super Bowl. And you've seen flashes offensively, but defensively. And now all that being said, this is probably a 9-6 game in overtime on Sunday. So.
Looking at the under. I love it. Russell Baxter joining us. And how about for our Miami fans here in South Florida? It's started off with a bang. We were going to win the Super Bowl. Now Adam Gase is the worst coach that ever walked on earth. Ryan Tannehill has got to go. You know, you get destroyed by the Patriots like they did. Now they got to go on the road to Cincinnati, who nobody thought Andy Dalton would play the way he has played. A couple of surprising teams, to say the least, doing battle this weekend. How do you break it down?
Well, I think people forget that Cincinnati last year, at the end of the year, was playing pretty respectable football. Let's not forget the last 2 weeks of the season, they personally knocked the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens out of the playoffs. And they did the latter in Baltimore when they had absolutely nothing to – remember, they went into the last 2 weeks of the season, Joe, they were 5-9. So the adage of we've got nothing to play for, they knocked Detroit. They basically knocked Jim Caldwell out of a job. And then, of course, Dalton to Tyler Boyd in the final minute put Baltimore out and put Buffalo in. Now we're off to a 3-1 start. They've scored at least 34 points in 3 of their 4 games. Defensively, they have some issues. But, Miami has been this kind of team under Adam Gase. They were 1-4 his first year. They went 9-2 and made the playoffs.
Yep.
Last year they were 4-2, and then they went 2-8 and missed the playoffs. This year they're 3-0. All of a sudden they didn't lay an egg; they laid a frittata against New England. Okay, and it's hard to get. I thought going into the season they were the hardest team to read. Tannehill was coming back after not playing football for more than a year. No more Pouncey, no more Landry, no more Sue. I couldn't figure out exactly what they're doing, and I still think they're a very, very hard team to figure it out. Now, all that being said, they're still 4 weeks into the season, or 4.5, atop the AFC East. And if they can steal one at Cincinnati, we shall see.
That changes the game, that's for sure. All right, and before I let you go here, Russell, I'm a diehard, lifelong Jet fan because I enjoy pain, but can Todd Bowles survive this season? Can the New York Jets continue with a young quarterback in Sam Darnold with a defensive-minded head coach? We've seen what's happened with Sean McVay, Matt Nagy in Chicago with young guys. You bring in these offensive-minded guys. Does Todd Bowles survive the year in New York?
I don't know if he survives the year, but I would like to see the Jets get him some more offensive weaponry. Okay? I mean, I thought Isaiah Crowell was a nice addition to go with Bilal Powell, but they really don't have a scary receiving threat. I was surprised they let Austin Seferian-Jenkins test free agency and didn't retain him. I think he would be helping them out an awful lot. I don't think Sam Darnold has a lot of options. I also think Sam Darnold doesn't have a lot of protection. And you look at you think about the last 2 games the Jets have played against Myles Garrett and that defense, and then against Jacksonville's pass rush, and this week they get Von Miller, although I actually think Denver's having a few more issues than the Jets, and I think the Jets rebound this week.
Oh, there you go. All right, you heard it there. Yeah. Russell Baxter, you definitely got to check it out. ProFootballGuru.com. Amazing takes, also fan-sided. You'll see his articles there. Make sure you follow him on Twitter, @BaxFootballGuru. Some great stuff each and every week. Russell, always a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Thanks for taking a few minutes, man. Have a safe weekend. Enjoy the games. We'll talk again soon.
You got it.
So joining us here on this Friday, and we are packed this weekend here when it comes to sports, but I couldn't think of anybody better to help us kind of break it down as we head into rivalry weekend in college football than the analytics master himself, Bill Connelly, SB Nation. He joins us via the Miami Acura hotline. And Bill, how does it work, man? Do you even get any sleep during the week, or are you just number crunching the whole damn time?
Well, you can survive on 6 hours. I will say that. I do a pretty good job on 6 hours. So as long as you get that, everything else is fine.
Yeah, some people count sheep. Bill Connelly, he counts numbers, man, as they're jumping over his bed is what's happening there. It's just unbelievable. Some of the best advanced football metrics around can be found at Bill's Twitter page, @SBN_Bill C. Make sure you guys check it out if you want to really, really dive in and try to understand what's happening in each of these games. Nobody does a better job than Bill. And I want to start first and foremost because I know I've been talking to a lot of folks, and I keep hearing the same thing, Bill, that Chip Kelly, stick a fork in him. He is done. He may not win a game this year, and that it's the whole Chip Kelly experiment is over. Are we being a little premature with sticking a fork in Chip Kelly?
Well, yeah, probably. But let's put it this way. If he is done, if he's toast, if he's got nothing left to offer college football or football in general, I guess, this is what it looks like, right? They bomb. He comes back next year. They still bomb, and he's done by the end of 2019. Of course, that is on the table, but this also does take the shape of a pretty clear, what I call a year zero situation where you are instituting a lot of changes into the DNA of your program, both in terms of offensive philosophy, in terms of practice style, in terms of just sports science, all the things he's trying to change about UCLA football, and then you're fielding a true freshman quarterback quarterback, and you're fielding a whole ton of freshmen and sophomores on defense and in the skill corps and pretty much everywhere. There are almost no seniors who are actually doing anything for this UCLA football team. So it's not hard to see a kind of a year zero situation too, where it takes a lot longer than maybe we anticipated to get the ducks in a row, so to speak. But then, once they're set up, he's fine.
Yeah, and let's not forget, his schedule this year has been brutal, has it not, Bill?
Yeah, no cupcakes whatsoever. I mean, we thought maybe Cincinnati qualified as a cupcake. Turns out Cincinnati's pretty good. Fresno State is, 2 years ago they would have killed Fresno State even with this team. Fresno State is now very good. So they miss Oregon State in Pac-12 play. There are no easy outs on their schedule at all. And so as opposed to talking about some 4-8 kind of struggle, now we are looking at a situation where there is a non-zero chance they go 0-12.
Yeah, so people just got to chill out. Give Chip Kelly a couple of years to get his players in, his system there, and then we'll be able to judge whether or not Chip Kelly is over and done with. Bill Connelly joining us, SB Nation. Make sure you check him out, SBN_Bill C on Twitter. Some of the best analytics in all of football, both college and the NFL. And we've got a rivalry game here, actually the rivalry weekend, but certainly here in South Florida, Bill. We got the Miami Hurricanes at home. They haven't beat Florida State in this building in a long, long time, but Florida State is not necessarily what they have been in the past. What are the metrics, what are the numbers and analytics telling us about this game?
Well, I mean, it tells us, first of all, that Miami is very, very good at the things that Oklahoma State, where did that come from? That Florida State has been very bad at. And so that's probably a pretty good sign for the Hurricanes. They can disrupt. They can take advantage of the patchwork offensive line. They can force negative plays, get DeAndre Francois into obvious pass situations, and then tee off. So if that actually comes to pass, then maybe nothing else matters. Maybe Miami will just kind of accidentally score enough points to win the game. But, at the very least, Florida State has improved. They've gotten their act together at least a hair these last couple of weeks. Now, our good team doesn't almost lose to Louisville at this point, and they really tried hard to lose to Louisville, but they're at least sort of pointing on an upward trajectory, and maybe they can find some things that work. The offensive line isn't quite as much of a sieve as it was about 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, they're trending upward. It's just Miami's already up at this point, and you would assume that Florida State's not ready to play at that level just yet.
And do you think, I mean, Mark Richt, he's been around a long time. Does Mark Richt leave the senior, the upperclassman for a freshman if he's not 100% and the team is not 100% behind this kid?
Yeah, I mean, you would think so. You would think that, if he makes the changes that he made here, that, everybody's on board with it. And so far, I mean, the offense isn't amazing by any stretch, but they're at least, it feels like they're not blowing as many opportunities. They're taking advantage of the chances they get. Overall, no matter who the quarterback is, they're doing a really nice job in the red zone, which is a change from last year. And so when they create those opportunities, they're getting a full set of points from it. But it is, you do figure that he needed to see quite a bit from a freshman to put a freshman in the game or into the starting lineup, and so far Perry's given him that.
Yeah, he certainly has. Bill Connelly, SB Nation, joining us via the Miami Acura hotline. One of the other big games in Florida is, it don't get any bigger than this, SEC football, big boy football here. LSU traveling on the road to Florida. Florida is in a very unfamiliar situation, an underdog at home in this game, laying 2.5 points right now. And this is one of the biggest games, not only from a betting standpoint right now, but certainly it's going to shape what happens in the SEC. Is LSU a little bit overrated and maybe Florida a little undervalued here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a difference in, but if you look at LSU's resume and then they're just kind of baseline level of quality, there's definitely a difference right now. The resume looks great. They did, they hopped on Miami early. They only had about 4 good offensive plays in that game, but that was enough with the turnovers and all that. And they got pretty lucky to beat Auburn in terms of turnovers and just being dramatically inefficient with the football, but still managing to, basically make about 3 good offensive plays and win. They aren't top 5 caliber good yet, but it doesn't matter. There are no takebacks when it comes to the wins themselves. So they're in a very good position right now. Florida probably needs a little bit of a breakthrough moment here. But, I mean, on paper, Florida might, if they're not the better team, they're really, really close to it. They've got a good defense. They should be able to render LSU's inefficient offense very inefficient. And as long as it's probably going to be one of those games that comes down to, who makes 2 or 3 big plays, who wins the turnover battle, all those littler things. things is probably what's going to determine this.
And their only loss, Florida, to Kentucky is looking less and less like a fluke.
Yeah.
Kentucky is actually a real team and a real program right now. So I don't think you can look at that loss and go, and that's pretty bad.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, using my S&P Plus rankings, Kentucky is 15th right now. Losing, you had a chance on the final drive to beat a top 15 team at home. Basically, that's how it played out. That's the one way to set the narrative for that Florida game. There's no shame in that whatsoever. That was probably, if not a sign of growth, at least not a setback. Even though we know that Florida isn't really used to losing to Kentucky all that often.
Yeah, no, certainly not. But Kentucky is a real team, so this should be a fun game. Also in the SEC. Auburn and Mississippi State. Boy, oh boy, this is going to be. Could we get another? 3-2 game, 6-5? What the hell was that, Bill? What do you see in this game?
Yeah, it was 3-2, and I had a post up this morning at SB Nation, kind of joking about that, just basically saying, Auburn and Mississippi State, they're not actually struggling on offense right now. They're just observing their history. This is the 10-year anniversary of the 3-2 game, and they seem to be unwittingly reverting to that form of late. It really is. Mississippi State's been a really interesting team this year in that, they play really good defense. They can run the ball really well. And it was just a question of, it was kind of a race against time. Could Joe Moorhead figure some things out in the passing game with Nick Fitzgerald, who isn't a great passer? Could they start to figure things out before defenses just loaded up against the run and shut everything down? And they lost that race against time, apparently, because the last two teams have loaded up against the run, shut that down, and Fitzgerald hasn't been able to pass them out of any holes. So it really is. Auburn's offensive line is going to get blown up by Mississippi State's defensive line. Auburn's going to force Mississippi State to pass, and they probably won't be able to. And so you do figure, if not 3-2, it would be kind of a surprise if either team topped about 21 or so.
The under might be looking very well here, but it's interesting because it's another home dog. Both Florida and Mississippi State will be home dogs this weekend, which is a lot of people are looking at that going, boy, this could provide some value and some opportunity. But there is one game tonight, Bill Connelly joining us, SB Nation, that I want to throw it out there because I love this. This is kind of one of my locks tonight. I love Utah State getting 2.5 points over BYU. I think Utah State is a very undervalued team. I think people are way overvaluing how good BYU is. Am I crazy along this thought line here?
Well, my numbers love Utah State. It kind of makes me nervous because, they thought that Utah State would kill Air Force last week, and they only won by 10 or so. But, on paper, BYU has been trending down since the Wisconsin win. That was a great win, but it was a situational win. They just made timely plays and got a missed field goal at the end and all that stuff. It was a great win, but it wasn't a sign of, hey, this is a top 20 team now. And Utah State, meanwhile, they almost outplayed Michigan State. Probably were unlucky to not win that game, and they have utterly destroyed some bad teams since then. And Air Force aside, I guess. But no, they're on paper they're a very, very good team, and this is a game they should go to Provo and they should win this game. But we'll see. BYU obviously can play that kind of LSU style game management, make the right plays at the right time kind of stuff, and Utah State's going to have to cope with that. Utah State loses close games, like 5 close games a year, so this would be right up their alley to lose this game like 27-24.
Analytics be damned, especially Bill Connelly's SB Nation joining us here. All right, let's transition into the NFL, and I want to ask you certainly for the folks here in South Florida. You grew up a Dolphin fan. You grew up following them. I know that. And it was looking really good. 3-1, it was looking really good the first 3 games, and then last week happened, and now Dolphin fans are ready to look for high bridges and start jumping here. What do the analytics say about the Miami Dolphins right now? Are they pretenders? Are they contenders? What are they?
Well, I think basically on paper they played like a 2-2 team, not necessarily 3-1, but good enough to go to at least split 4 games. I think is basically what my analytics say anyway. They've been a little lucky on the turnover side. They are not dramatically efficient, but they're really good at creating big plays, which is a tricky thing because it's great to have. It's also hard to rely on. You never really know when those big plays are going to come. But they are very explosive. They're rendering their opponents less explosive. They win the field position battle. They do a lot of the little things pretty well. The big thing, the efficiency thing, they're not all that great at. So you do figure this is more like a 500 team on paper than 3-1.
And one of the teams, the very first team that they beat in a 19-day affair that they had to play in the weather here in South Florida was Tennessee. And I know you have written on SB Nation, the analytics aren't necessarily great for Tennessee. Are you buying Mike Vrabel and the Tennessee Titans right now?
Well, I mean, they've shown a lot of the quote-unquote game management is apparently the phrase of the day. But, I mean, they do, they limit big plays. They play well in the red zone. They do a lot of those types of little things. They're also dramatically less efficient than their opponent. And over time, that tends to catch up to you. So, yeah, on paper, they have been by far the worst of the 3-1 teams. And, they played 4 close games. Now, the thing they've got going for them, of course, is that Mariota has been hurt for half of that spell. And, he was out there throwing passes without really being able to feel his fingers a couple of games ago. So if he's able to get healthy and the offense improves as he gets more and more up to form and whatnot, then they can play better offense, and with a good defense, maybe that's enough. Like, you don't have to. There are no takebacks with the wins. They already have 3. So if they go 6-6 the rest of the way, they're in the wild card hunt. And so I don't want to call them outright frauds or anything because their offense should improve, but they are very, very lucky to be 3-1. I can say that.
And let me ask you, because I've asked a few people this now, and I keep getting different answers. But when you look at the Jets situation and what's going on, and you look what happened with the Rams, in this NFL, can you win with a defensive-minded head coach and a young quarterback? Is that even possible anymore?
I'm sure it's possible, but it does seem like a pretty weird combination. There are definitely the stretch between good offenses and bad offenses in the NFL right now is much, much, much bigger than between like the best and worst defenses. So if you can find, it does seem like there's a lot of opportunity if you can find a really good offensive-minded head coach who clicks well with a young quarterback. You can, create some sort of benefits from that, and I mean, anything's possible, but yeah, it does seem like that's kind of at this exact moment in time at least the right recipe.
What's the biggest surprise thus far for you, Bill, looking at the NFL? Is Kansas City and what they've been able to do, is that one of the biggest surprises for you? What have you looked at and go, well, I didn't see that coming?
Well, yeah, I mean, even everybody who was high on Patrick Mahomes heading into the year, I don't think they were this high. So anytime a first-time starter can do this, and even against the Broncos the other day where he struggled in a lot of ways, the young quarterbacks will struggle on the road against a pretty, a feisty home crowd and a good pass rush and all that, he still settles himself and goes out and makes every play in the fourth quarter and wins the game. I thought, that was probably his least impressive game from a stat standpoint, but maybe his most impressive game from just a mental standpoint. So that was really encouraging to see. I think the biggest surprise to me has just been the number of good offenses, plain and simple, because it doesn't seem necessarily like a fluke right now. The offenses are finally, the closed-mindedness of a lot of the play calling in the NFL seems to be kind of dissipating a little bit, and teams are basically saying, well, we can get free yards doing these things, throwing short to guys at the line of scrimmage and doing all this. Why aren't we doing more of that? And a lot of teams are doing more of that, and surprise, surprise, it's working pretty well. But obviously now, roughing the passer, that hasn't hurt offenses by any means. The illegal contact penalties have helped. So there is that aspect too, but a lot of this is just play calling.
And have you, Bill, you being an analytics guy, and Bill Connelly, SB Nation, Bill, I'm telling you, analytics has taken over baseball. We know that. And to a certain degree, even in the NBA, but do you see the analytics machine eventually taking over the NFL? Can it take over the NFL like it has these other leagues?
Well, I think the shift towards more passing, that's something that analytics folks have been saying for a while, that it just doesn't make sense to run the ball as much as you run it when passing is more efficient. And then, so I think we're starting to maybe start to see the beginnings of, this optimal, what we would call a statistically optimal style of play, like with baseball with the 3 true outcomes and the home runs and the strikeouts and all that. There are not many stolen bases in the NBA, of course, or in basketball in general. You got a lot more 3-point attempts. Long twos are bad and all that. We kind of come up with a statistically optimal style, and I think we're starting to see that in football as well, with the short passing game, with teams running less than ever. Now, that said, there's always a way to zig when everybody else is zagging. You know, the Royals basically loaded up on speed and winning the World Series a couple of years ago. So my initial thought is, you know, I don't want the sport to be boring. I don't want everybody to be doing the same thing because the analytics say so, because basketball's gotten kind of boring at times. But there's always a way to basically load up on the inefficiencies that a new system, so to speak, creates. And I think you're going to see some teams doing some interesting things in that regard, too.
Yeah, it's coming, that's for sure. All right, Bill Connelly, SB Nation. Make sure you follow him. Nobody does analytics better than he does. College football, NFL, at SBN_Bill C. Make sure you follow him. It's a great follow. And, Bill, thanks for taking a few minutes out, hanging out with us, my friend. Enjoy the games this weekend. We'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.